This video is brought to you by War Thunder. This is the night that everything went wrong. Singapore Airlines 319 should have landed 30 minutes ago, but they are not on the ground. Not even close. They are circling over Singapore, burning fuel. Below them, a monster storm has seized control of Changi Airport. The visibility is down to 200 meters. The winds are shifting 180 degrees by the minute, and there's lightning everywhere. The conditions are so bad that Changi Airport has shut down. Both of their alternate airports have shut down too. But inside the cockpit, the fuel gauge is falling fast. Less than 5 minutes of fuel left. And what happens next will push this crew and this 777 to the absolute edge of survival. This is Singapore Airlines Flight 319. Somewhere over mainland Malaysia, 100 miles to the north of Singapore, the crew of Singapore Airlines Flight 319 begins their descent into the Lion City. But up ahead, at Changi Airport, a massive thunderstorm is developing. Deep red bleeds on the weather radar. Heavy rain, lightning, crosswinds. Departures are getting delayed and landings are getting tricky.
Singapore 319 approach control. Expect ILS approach runway 20 right, Changi.
They have been in the air for nearly 14 hours from London and they are running 20 minutes behind schedule. The headwinds over Asia were stronger than they had predicted and they have already burned through more fuel than planned. Changi is one of the busiest airports in Southeast Asia. At any given moment, a dozen aircraft circle overhead, waiting for their turn to land. Delays are expected even on normal days. But today is not a normal day. The captain glances at the fuel display. Their estimated landing fuel is 7,000 kilos. Technically, this is more than double the 3,000 kilos that they need to legally land with. But given they are already running late and they have burned extra fuel, that margin isn't as comfortable as it looks.
Singapore 319 joined the holding pattern at Paspu.
Due to the traffic congestion over Changi Airport, ATC instructs Flight 319 to hold at a waypoint called Paspu, 40 miles to the north of the city. The first officer programs this into the flight computer and the plane begins flying towards this waypoint. Every minute of flying burns 100 kilos of fuel. The 4,000 kilo buffer gives them just about 40 additional minutes in the sky. En route to Paspu, the first officer checks the weather radar again. The storm over the airport isn't showing any signs of weakening. If anything, it's intensifying. They could be stuck at Paspu for a while. But the thing is, this thunderstorm didn't come as a surprise for the crew. Because 14 hours earlier, during pre-flight checks at Heathrow, they already knew about this storm. And they made a decision about it. A decision that seemed perfectly reasonable at that time. In the cockpit, the pilots are running through their pre-flight checks. The captain pulls up the destination weather forecast. The forecast shows typical Singapore weather. But there is one item that's flagged. Tempo TS, temporary thunderstorms predicted between 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. local time. That's right around their arrival window. But these temporary storms are routine in Southeast Asia. They build fast in the afternoon heat, dump rain for about 30 to 40 minutes, and then they dissipate just as quickly. For a Singaporean crew, this is weather that they have flown through 100 times. As the captain reviews the weather, outside, a fuel truck pulls up beneath the wing. The captain now needs to decide how much fuel he's going to unload for the flight. They had earlier planned to take 106,000 kilos of fuel. This was enough to reach Singapore with all the legal reserves. But given the thunderstorm prediction that he has just seen in the forecast, he considers taking on just a little extra fuel, just as a margin for safety. The Boeing 777-300 can hold 171,000 kilos in its wings. Another 10,000 kilos would give 2 extra hours of holding time. But there's a trade-off. More fuel means more weight. And more weight means higher fuel burn. And if the weather clears as per the forecast and they end up not using it, then they've just burnt extra fuel and extra money unnecessarily. The captain looks at the forecast again. The storm is estimated to last for just 30 minutes. 45 minutes worst case. The visibility, even in the storm, is predicted to be above their landing minimums. And their alternate airports at Paya Lebar, at Senai, and at Kuala Lumpur are all predicted to have clear weather. And there's one more factor. On long-haul flights from Europe to Southeast Asia, air traffic control almost always offers them shortcuts, direct routes that shave miles off and save fuel. Given all these reasons, the captain decides to take only the planned 106,000 kilos and nothing more. The fuel hose connects and the numbers on the display begin climbing. This is the kind of decision that long-haul pilots make thousands of times in their careers. A decision that they almost never regret. But tonight, every kilogram that they chose not to take will matter. Flight 319 enters the hold over Paspu. Below them, the weather at Changi Airport shows no resemblance to the forecast. What was supposed to be a temporary shower is intensifying. The rain thickens into a torrential downpour, and the visibility has dropped to 2 nautical miles. And the winds are swinging wildly, gusting and shifting direction by the minute.
All stations expect delay. Tailwind on 20 right now exceeding 10 knots.
Runway 20 right, their planned runway, now has a tailwind exceeding 10 knots. Planes prefer landing into a headwind. Headwind gives the pilots the most control, and it also decreases the landing distance. Landing with a tailwind is risky. The plane comes in faster and it needs more runway to stop. And in this rain, with visibility already deteriorating, the margins are razor thin. The first officer does the math. Their current landing fuel is 6,700 kilos. At this fuel burn rate, they have enough fuel to hold for 30 minutes before they reach minimum fuel. The magic number to remember is 3,000 kilos. Unless they are vectored into Changi soon, they'll need to start considering diverting to one of their alternate airports. The first officer zooms out on the weather radar to check the weather over their alternates. And that's when it hits them. That's when they realize that their situation is far worse than what they initially thought. Because it's not just Changi that's under bad weather, there's an ocean of red over Paya Lebar, their first alternate. And there's a massive red over Senai Airport, their secondary alternate. Both were forecast to be clear. Both are now reporting heavy rainfall. Kuala Lumpur, which is 30 minutes to the north, is in clear weather. But to go to Kuala Lumpur, they'll need to divert right now. This means abandoning Singapore. It also means that 280 passengers on this flight will miss their connecting flights. The captain isn't ready to make that call just yet. The first officer scans the weather radar, trying to find an alternate airport in clear weather. And luckily, he finds one. 16 miles south of Changi, there's a small patch of green on the display. Batam Airport in Indonesia. A small regional airport that mostly handles narrow-body traffic. But right now, it's showing clear conditions.
We could divert to Batam if we need to,
the first officer says. The captain checks the fuel display. Landing fuel is 5,800 kilos. Emergency fuel is 3,000 kilos. They still have around 25 minutes of flying time.
Let's give Changi one more hold. If they vector us in the next 10 minutes, then we'll be fine.
But storms don't sit still. What the crew doesn't know is that the massive thunderstorm over Changi has begun to drift. It's drifting south, directly towards Batam Airport. War Thunder is the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made, and it's available free on PC, consoles, and mobile devices. With over 2,500 tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships from 10 major nations, ranging from biplanes of the 1920s to modern fighter jets, War Thunder offers something unique for aviation enthusiasts like you to immerse yourself with highly detailed vehicles, realistic graphics, and authentic sound effects. What I love most about War Thunder is the amazing vehicle damage model. There are no simple boxes with hit points here. Every vehicle is intricately modeled down to its individual components like engines, fuel tanks, weapons, and crew. All susceptible to damage, or disabling from enemy fire. Different types of armor, shells and missiles all behave like their real-world counterparts. In X-ray view, you'll see precisely where the shell penetrated, which components were affected, and what ultimately led to the destruction of the vehicle. The game offers 3 distinct modes for every type of player. Arcade mode for fast-paced action, simulator mode for the ultimate realism challenge, and realistic mode which strikes a perfect balance. As someone who studies aviation incidents, I particularly appreciate simulator mode, where understanding proper engine management and emergency procedures actually matters. You don't even need special hardware. War Thunder runs on the in-house developed Dagor engine, which is heavily optimized to deliver a lag-free experience with impressive visuals and high frame rates even on lower-end machines. Play War Thunder for free today using the links in the description below. New players and the ones who haven't played in the last 6 months on PCs and consoles that sign up through my links will receive a massive bonus pack with premium vehicles, Silver Lions, and 7 days of premium account time. Everything you need to start your journey. By this time, due to the extreme tailwind on runway 20 right, Changi Airport switches the active runway to 02 left. Planes will now land from the opposite direction. Every aircraft lined up for 20 right is now being torn out of the sequence, repositioned, reslotted, and revectored to 02 left. This adds to the delays. Flight 319 has completed one full loop of the holding pattern. Their landing fuel drops to 5,500 kilos. The fuel levels are getting too tight for comfort.
Singapore 319, descend to 4,000 feet, heading 020, vectors for ILS runway 02 left.
Finally, after a delay of 20 minutes, burning fuel and watching their options disappear, they are being vectored for the approach to Singapore. The first officer pulls up the approach plate for 02 left. The captain begins configuring the aircraft for landing.
Singapore 319, heavy rain over Changi, visibility 2 nautical miles, reducing.
2 nautical miles, that's well above the 550 meter minimum. It's tight, but legal. The aircraft descends through 5,000 feet, heading towards the airport. The landing fuel is 5,000 kilos, around 20 minutes before they need to declare an emergency. The captain searches for the city lights below. Nothing but grey. At Changi Airport, the weather is winning. Changi had just switched runways from 20 right to 02 left because of tailwind conditions. But the winds have swung again, and there's now a tailwind on runway 02 left as well. To add to that, there is intense rain and wind shear on both the northern and southern approaches to 02 left. 3 aircraft on final approach to 02 left have already gone around due to poor visibility and erratic surface winds. The conditions at Changi are just too dangerous right now. Changi ATC decides to shut down arrivals until the weather improves.
Stations Changi Airport is suspending arrivals. All runways are now closed.
The first officer glances at the captain, but neither speaks.
Singapore 319, cancel approach clearance, proceed direct to Samco and hold. Possible delay of 5 minutes.
They were just minutes away from landing, but they are now going back into holding. With Changi Airport now closed for landings, ATC vectors Flight 319 to another holding point called Samco further south of the airport. The fuel has dropped to 4,500 kilos. The good news with Samco is that it is equidistant to both Changi and Batam airports. The bad news with Samco is that it is so far down south that it takes them out of range from Kuala Lumpur. So Changi and Batam are now their only 2 hopes.
Singapore approach 319, we are now reclassifying Batam as an alternate.
On their way to Samco, the first officer tunes the radio to Batam's automated weather broadcast. The current weather for Batam shows that the airport is still clear. But that's just the current weather, not the forecast. What they don't hear over the ATIS is that the storm is still on the move towards Batam. The landing fuel drops down to 4,000 kilos.
Singapore approach 319, we can only accept 1 hold at Samco. After that, we'll be down to emergency fuel.
Singapore 319, Roger, stand by for updates.
The aircraft enters a racetrack pattern over Samco.
All stations, latest Changi weather, visibility runway 20 left, now less than 500 meters. No improvement expected.
Down on the ground, Singapore ATC calls Indonesia to coordinate the diversion of Flight 319 to Batam Airport. Singapore Approach Control coordinates with their peers at Tanjung Pinang Approach Control. They in turn need to coordinate with Nadim Tower, who in turn needs to talk to the Batam apron controller. At Batam Airport, the apron controller doesn't respond immediately. The airport doesn't normally handle 777s, so he reaches for the operations manual. He needs to check if the runway can handle a 777. Do they have enough firefighting equipment? Where will they even park a plane of that size? Meanwhile, an ATR turboprop is calling the controller for pushback clearance, and a Garuda A320 wants taxi instructions. The controller is juggling too many things at once. Up in the cockpit of Flight 319, the crew sees none of this complexity. All they know is that they are now down to 3,800 kilos of landing fuel, and they have no clearance to land neither at Changi nor at Batam. The leading edge of the storm is just 5 minutes away from the island. Singapore is a hub airport. What this means is that most passengers landing here are connecting to other flights across Asia and beyond. And this specific aircraft is also scheduled to fly to Tokyo in a matter of hours, with a cabin full of waiting passengers. Diverting to Batam would mean hundreds of stranded passengers, cancelled flights, and a domino effect of delays across the network. The captain is keen to land this plane at Changi to avoid all this disruption. It's 4:36 p.m.
Singapore arrival, any update on the weather?
Singapore 319 negative, no update at this time. Changi is still not accepting arrivals.
So Changi is still closed and Batam clearance hasn't arrived yet. The landing fuel is around 3,800 kilos. The safest thing to do right now is to declare a fuel emergency and divert to Batam immediately. Remember when they initially arrived at Samco, the captain told the ATC that they had only enough fuel for one hold at Samco. But the captain, wanting to land at Changi, convinces himself that since they are equidistant to both the airports, performing a second hold at Samco won't affect them much. He's placing his hope that Changi will reopen before they complete the next hold.
Singapore arrival 319. Actually, we can perform one more hold.
Singapore 319, roger. Continue holding at Samco. But the storm over Changi shows no signs of weakening. Sometimes the hardest decision is accepting that your plan has to change. On the ground at Batam Airport, the first raindrops hit the tarmac. 4:42 p.m. The aircraft completes its second orbit over Samco. Landing fuel is 3,400 kilos. 6 minutes to emergency fuel levels. 1 minute later, the ATC instructs Flight 319 to exit the holding pattern.
Singapore 319, turn right heading 180.
The first officer programs the heading. The aircraft banks right. For a moment, the captain believes that Changi has reopened for landings. But when he sees the heading indicator 180 degrees, he realizes that ATC is vectoring them away from Singapore and towards Batam. But the captain is still hoping that they'd be able to land in Singapore, and he doesn't want to fly too far away. So he decides to remain at Samco and perform a 360-degree orbit to both save fuel and to remain closer to Changi. But before they begin the orbit, the first officer programs Batam as their destination in the flight computer to check their fuel status. The estimated landing fuel for Batam shows 3,400 kilos. That's barely 400 kilos above their final reserve fuel. He tells the captain that they don't have enough fuel to even perform the orbit. They are out of time and they need to divert right now.
Singapore arrival 319, we are diverting to Batam now.
This was a call that he should have made 20 minutes ago.
Singapore 319, roger. Expect VOR approach runway 22, Batam.
The aircraft banks right, south, away from Singapore towards Indonesia. But remember, Batam still hasn't given clearance though. They are flying towards an airport that might not let them land. Fuel on board is 4,000 kilos. At Batam, the rain has intensified. The wind picks up and gusts sweep across the runway. The windsock begins dancing. Batam Airport is now facing the same conditions that have just shut down Changi. Halfway to Batam, the captain reaches for the control yoke.
I have control.
You have control.
The captain will now fly the approach. The first officer will handle radios, navigation, and look at the approach charts. 3,800 kilos. 800 above emergency fuel. Less than 8 minutes of flying. One approach, that's all they have the fuel for. One chance. 1 minute into the diversion to Batam, the captain checks their position again. Batam is 14 miles ahead, Changi is 23 miles behind. And Changi is getting further every second.
Singapore arrival. Is Changi accepting arrivals yet?
The first officer turns to look at the captain. Why is he flip-flopping? They have literally just committed to going to Batam, and now what's happening is that the captain is showing signs of plan continuation bias. It's a psychological trap of fixating on the original plan even when all the data says that they need to change course. The captain has seen this before in simulator training, but recognizing it in real life and breaking out of it are two completely different things.
Singapore 319, negative. Changi is still not accepting arrivals.
The choice is made for him. They continue towards Batam. The fuel gauge reads 3,500 kilos. The captain makes a call.
Singapore approach, Singapore 319 is at minimum fuel.
With this call, the captain is expecting to get priority vectoring and a direct route to Batam. But nothing happens. The ATC continues vectoring them as normal, weaving them through all the other traffic in the region. And that's because a minimum fuel call isn't an emergency. It's just an FYI to ATC that any further delay could result in an emergency. But it isn't one just yet. The captain waits. 5 minutes pass, no priority vectoring, and no shortcuts. The landing fuel dwindles below 3,000 kilos. Final reserve levels. They legally need to declare a fuel emergency now.
Singapore 319, mayday, mayday, mayday fuel.
Now, this changes everything. There's no more waiting for clearances and no more bureaucratic delays. Every airport opens up to them. If they can reach a runway, they can land there. The aircraft is 30 nautical miles southeast of Batam Airport. Singapore ATC hands them over to Indonesian ATC. The first officer switches frequency.
Tanjung Pinang approach, good evening. Singapore 319, mayday, mayday, mayday fuel.
Singapore 319, Tanjung Pinang. Roger your mayday, vectors for VOR approach runway 22. The storm has arrived in full force over Batam Airport. Batam Airport has a single runway, 0422. The current active runway is runway 22. But runway 22 is the inferior of the two runways. This side of the runway only has a VOR approach, which means it just has lateral guidance but no glide slope. The other side, runway 04, has an ILS, which means if the plane can land from that side, it can auto-land, which will be very helpful in conditions like this. But given their current location, runway 22 is closer, and repositioning for runway 04 would burn more fuel that they don't have. So they decide to land on runway 22. The fuel on board is 3,600 kilos. 5 p.m. Flight 319 has flown all the way around the island and now begins a left turn to join the final approach onto runway 22 at Batam. Singapore 319, descend to 3,000 feet, cleared VOR approach runway 22. Since runway 22 doesn't have a glide slope, the first officer needs to manually check the airport charts and call out what altitude they need to be at which point to make sure that they are on profile. The forward visibility is okay. The runway lights are visible through the rain. But just as the plane drops to 2,500 feet on final approach, the tailwind hitting the airplane intensifies. In just the last 2 minutes, the wind direction has shifted. Runway 22 now has a tailwind of 14 knots, gusting to 30. When Changi had shut down arrivals earlier, the tailwind there was just 10 knots. The landing conditions now are worse than what they were at Changi. A Boeing 777 is certified for a maximum tailwind of 15 knots. Singapore Airlines' policy is stricter. They don't allow their pilots to land at more than a 10-knot tailwind. A 30-knot gust is unsafe to land at. The captain decides not to risk it for the biscuit and decides not to continue the approach.
Singapore 319 going around.
He stabilizes the plane at 1,600 feet and overflies the runway. The captain decides to remain low so that he can quickly attempt a second approach from the other side, runway 04. Because runway 04 has an ILS, and with the visibility dropping and the rain intensifying, the captain wants to allow the airplane to auto-land. But first, they need to get to the other side. Massive storm cells are in their way. The captain has to fly the plane further out west to avoid the thunderstorm, using up more fuel than he'd like to. A low fuel warning comes up for the first time inside the cockpit. To save fuel, the captain initiates a wide left turn back to the runway around 2 nautical miles from the runway threshold. The plane overshoots the runway center line and the captain turns the plane further left to bring it back to the course. At this time, through the rain, the captain spots the runway lights.
Tangent Penang, Singapore 319, runway 04 is in sight.
Singapore 319, contact Nadim Tower on 118.7. The approach controller hands them off to the tower controller for landing clearance. The captain is performing two jobs. He is both flying the airplane and he's talking to ATC on the radio. But in the heat of the moment, although he acknowledges the frequency change, he forgets to actually switch the frequency on the radio. The plane is way too high to intercept the ILS. They are attempting to intercept at an angle of 15 degrees at a vertical speed of 1300 feet per minute. The autopilot needs a much gentler intercept angle to lock on, preferably from a much further distance out. So the captain disengages the autopilot and manually banks the plane to the right. He points the nose down, trying to guide it back onto the center line. The captain manages to bring the plane close to the center line, and the pink diamonds move towards the center. He arms the approach mode. The autopilot manages to capture the localizer and the glide slope. The diamonds on the display turn pink. Locked in. He re-engages the autopilot. Autoland should take over. The aircraft will fly itself down. They are going to make it. Rain hammers the windscreen. The wipers work frantically. 668 feet. 600 feet. And then, without warning, the primary flight display flashes a message. No Autoland. And then half a second later, the localizer diamond swings hard to the right. Full-scale deflection. The glide slope diamond drops all the way to the bottom. Full-scale deflection. The plane is suddenly off the center line and off the glide slope. The autopilot has lost guidance. 400 feet. The captain grabs the control yoke. He disengages the autopilot and takes manual control. But he can't see the runway. The rain is too heavy. He's flying on instruments and the instruments are telling him that he's nowhere near the center line. Down on the ground, the tower controller is worried. The emergency airplane that was supposed to make contact with him hasn't called in yet. He hasn't cleared the plane to land either. He can't see the plane because of the absurd visibility. 300 feet. 200 feet. The captain tries to correct, banks left. He drops the nose slightly, searching for the glide path. But the instruments don't stabilize. The localizer still shows a deflection. He doesn't know where the center line is. 132 feet above the ground. The runway threshold is somewhere below them, but there's nothing visible through the rain. With no other choice, he jams the toga switches and both the engines roar to full power. Max fuel consumption. The nose pitches up. Flight 319 climbs away from Batam for the second time today. The fuel is 1900 kilos. But why did the Autoland fail? Because of how close to the runway threshold they were when they made the turn, the autopilot just didn't have enough distance to get the plane into a stabilized position. And when the captain engaged the autopilot, the plane was still crossing the runway center line and was pointed at a heading different to that of the runway. And so the flight computer rejected the Autoland. Had the crew simply flown a regular downwind and approached the runway from 6 nautical miles, the Autoland would have worked perfectly. And they'd be taxiing on the ground right now. But in their haste, they cut corners, literally. And now they are in a worse condition because of that. 5:09 p.m. Flight 319 climbs away from Batam after the second go-around. The fuel is 1900 kilos. The crew though still doesn't know why the Autoland failed. The visibility on runway 04 is actually worse than runway 22. The only reason they preferred 04 was due to the Autoland. But for them, that's no longer an option. So runway 22 might now be the better option, provided the tailwind that they earlier experienced has subsided. He keys the radio.
Tangent Penang approach, Singapore 319, request current wind for runway 22.
Singapore 319, stand by. But since they are talking to the approach controller and not to the tower controller, approach needs to relay this question to tower, wait for an answer, and then relay it back. All this takes time. And time is fuel. The captain banks right, turning downwind, repositioning for another attempt at runway 04. 1850 kilos. The aircraft continues in the downwind leg. 90 seconds pass before they receive the weather information. Singapore 319, tailwind on runway 22 is less than 7 knots. 7 knots. That's landable. Runway 22 is now again an option. But switching to runway 22 means flying all the way around to the other side of the airport. More time, more fuel. 1750 kilos, They don't have it. They decide to try 04 again.
Tanjung Pinang 319, negative on 22. Insufficient fuel. We are continuing for runway 04.
Due to the weather, the captain doesn't fly a straight downwind. The downwind leg has taken them closer to the center line. And once again, just like last time, he makes a turn towards the runway at under 2 nautical miles. They really should have been doing this at 6 nautical miles or further. Stress has beaten his training. The captain calls for flaps 20, low fuel configuration. The current fuel is 1650 kilos. They are deep inside the clouds and the visibility is terrible. The aircraft descends through 1000 feet and they break through the lowest layer of the clouds. And both pilots see it instantly. The plane is way too high, well above the glide slope, and they are too far to the left, offset from the runway center line significantly. The captain pushes the nose down, trying to salvage it, forcing the aircraft down towards the glide slope. He is trying to drop the plane into the slot. The descent rate increases, 1200 feet per minute, 1400 feet per minute. They are just 600 feet above the ground. And then the cockpit erupts with warnings.
Sink rate.
The aircraft is descending too fast, too close to the ground, dangerously close, 400 feet. The aircraft is screaming at them that they might crash into the ground, 300 feet. The captain's hand hovers over the toggle switches, but they are so low on fuel that they might not have another chance. He has to choose, land unstable or go around and burn more fuel. The captain jams the toggle switches again. For the third time today, the GE90 engines roar to full power. The nose pitches skyward. Flight 319 climbs away from Batam. 3 approaches, 3 go-arounds. The aircraft levels off at 2000 feet. The fuel is 1400 kilos.
Tanjung Pinang, Singapore 319, fuel is critical.
The captain is now going to try a teardrop maneuver. He'll fly straight ahead, execute a U-turn, and land on runway 22 from the opposite side. It's the shortest path, the most fuel efficient, because they don't have fuel for anything else. 5:16 p.m. The aircraft completes the teardrop and it lines up with runway 22. Outside, it's getting darker. The storm is still active. The tailwind over runway 22 has now increased again to 15 knots. The 777 certification tailwind limit is 15 knots. Singapore Airlines' policy limit is 10 knots. Desperate times call for desperate measures. They have been flying for over 14 hours and fatigue is already kicked in. Current fuel is 1000 kilos. The captain runs through the landing checklist. Flaps 20, check. Speed, check. Gear, down. Landing checklist is complete. The first officer switches frequency. Finally.
Nadeem Tower, Singapore 319, 2 miles final runway 22.
Singapore 319, Nadeem Tower, clear to land runway 22, wind 330 at 15, gusting 18, emergency equipment standing by.
The captain is hand flying. His eyes move between the instruments and the windscreen. He's looking for the runway. 800 feet. There. Through the rain. Runway lights. Runway 22, straight ahead. The aircraft descends through 1000 feet. Rain streaks across the windscreen. Wipers work frantically. This is a non-ILS approach. The visibility from this direction is better. 6 miles instead of 500 meters. They can see it clearly. 600 feet. The first officer calls out altitudes. 500. The captain nods. Steady on the controls. 400. The PAPI lights show 2 white, 2 red. Perfect glide slope. They are on profile. 300. The aircraft is stable. On center line. On glide slope. 200. The runway threshold is approaching. 100. The captain begins the flare, pulls back gently on the yoke, and the nose rises slightly. 50 feet. 30 feet. 20 feet. Contact. The main landing gear touches down on runway 22 at Batam Airport. The aircraft rolls down the runway. The thrust reversers deploy and the brakes engage. The speed bleeds off. The aircraft slows down to taxi speed and turns off the runway into the taxiway. The fuel remaining at landing is less than 500 kilos. If they had to go around a fourth time, they wouldn't have made it back. The aircraft refueled at Batam and returned to Singapore's Changi airport later that evening. Thanks again to War Thunder. Play War Thunder for free today using the links in the description below. New players and the ones who haven't played in the last 6 months on PCs and consoles that sign up through my links will receive a massive bonus pack with premium vehicles, Silver Lions, and 7 days of premium account time. everything you need to start your journey.